Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of you have followed our programs over the years, you know that one of the subjects we enjoy talking about is that of love. I mean, after all, think about it. Many of us approaching midlife have probably been in several relationships, and maybe very few of us have been in long-term relationships, but now find ourselves navigating those sacred waters where we try to find a new partner and see if we can get that long-lasting relationship to occur for us. On the program today, we're going to talk about something where people have struggled to find, hold, or maintain deep, safe, and long-lasting relationships in their lives, are trying to find ways that we can do this. But you may be surprised at the very reason that a lot of us maybe have difficulty doing this. It's because your brain has been perhaps misprogrammed, according to our guest, who teaches that, yes, you do deserve to have long-lasting, deep love. But as very few people understand, love's style that plays out throughout our lives and underlying subconscious approaches to love, you either have secure, which leads to long-lasting, fully embodied love, avoidance, which causes a person to find ways not to fully commit or become deeply intimate, and lastly, anxious, in which a person creates drama from the fear that the relationship is always in jeopardy. These are just some of the many things that are explored in his newest book, Safe to Love Again, How to Release the Pain of Past Relationships and Create the Love You Deserve. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Gary Salyer. Dr. Salyer, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be on Beyond 50.
Now, do you prefer to be called Dr. Salyer, or should we just say Gary? Dr. Gary, perhaps.
Yeah. Dr. Gary, I don't care. So I'm glad to be on the show with you.
Well, we're glad to have you. You know, it's funny because there's so many books. I mean, we're talking perhaps tens of thousands of books that are written out there from people who seem to be in the know about what love is and how it works. And a lot of times the message almost seems to be the same. But yours really seems a little bit different, or even quite a bit different in some ways, in a way that makes sense. And you certainly, through your experience, could pretty much relate to a lot of our listeners out there. Let's talk about how this started for you.
Well, I didn't grow up in the most safe family. Just put it that way. My mother was borderline personality disorder. And there wasn't a lot of being welcomed. In fact, it started early. My mother was so expecting a girl that when I was born, she refused to name me. It wasn't until 3 weeks after I was born that the state of Ohio sent some state troopers to the house and said, "Ma'am, you gotta name him." And she goes, "I refused to." And they said, "Well, you either name him or we can put you in a place where you have a while to think about it." So that was the sort of place that I began to ask, what does this thing mean? I mean, even when I was 7, I noticed, why can't people love each other? So it's been kind of a lifelong burning issue. Why don't we love each other better?
Now, you talk about in your book that the wired brain, so to speak, is something that we actually have that maybe goes back as early as pre-birth up to the age of 3. Let's talk about what exactly that means.
Okay. It used to be that we thought memories, you kind of started from 0, right, for the day you were born. But the brain is actually on, and we line that 3rd trimester. And we now know that babies are getting imprints, is what they're called. They're picking up not only the tension within the mother's body. If she's got cortisol, the baby's got cortisol, right? If there's stress going on. But they're picking up sounds. They're picking up the tension. And that's, in fact, they know when they're welcomed or not. They can feel, even in the womb, when they're welcomed or not. I mean, psychologist Dan Siegel did an experiment with his wife where for each of his 3 children, he sang a different song into the womb of his mother, of his wife at night. And miraculously, when they were 3 and 4, these children did not know why, but they loved those 3 different songs. That's what's going forward. And it either tells us we have a warm, welcoming place, or we don't feel so welcomed. The way it will play out later is if you didn't get that welcome at first, you may walk into a room, say you're at an event or someplace, and you just walk into, maybe your church or someplace, and you think, wow, man, I don't know that do I really belong here? Maybe I should just hang out and get a seat, and you don't feel comfortable. I don't know if I fit here. That's how that feeling that you get early on will track, and you won't know why, but later on in various situations, you just won't feel like you have a place. And that is attachment. That's the same feeling tracking until you change it, until you have a right to feel welcome with joy. So what starts out early will track until we give it some attention and upgrade it.
So now, because we've been imprinted early, if we come to work on these particular things through our lives, that we can actually rewire this. Is that possible?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. The thing that is so important is when people read a lot of books on love. Just last week, I had a friend tell me that she gave the book to a friend of hers, and the woman said, oh, no, not another book that's going to tell me I'm wrong. I know that about people. We all are afraid, oh, my God, am I wrong? And the very first thing I say in the book is nobody's wrong, because at some point in time, the brain took the best deal available. So if it took the best deal then, it's still looking to take the best deal. We just have to, work with our brains in a way we give it incentive to take a better deal. And so it's all adjustable. There's hope for real change, and your brain isn't walking out there trying to mess with you. Your brain took a better deal, and if we can just help it get safe with what you really want, it'll take a better deal out. Now, there's some real skills, and it takes working with somebody to do that most of the time. But yes, it is adjustable. There's real hope that you can have the safe, secure, lasting love you desire.
You were talking about ways that we actually learn about love, especially we have imprinting, but then there's also another one that's out there that I like to bring up, and that is the idea of the happily ever after stereotype. Most of us understand, at least from our first couple of experiences, that we have the feeling of being in love, and that generally comes from the reality of how other people make us feel about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But we also know that doesn't last forever. And I think usually around the same time as when that in love or that honeymoon period of a relationship tends to fade and you realize, okay, now the real me is here. The real me has finally showed up. I can't hold this illusion forever about who I am. And therefore disappointment sets in. So it's sort of the fairy tale, if you will, that promises the happily ever after, but well, that just doesn't seem to occur. That happens quite a bit too, doesn't it?
It does, and there's kind of two reasons for it. First off, we know that attraction is just a cascade of initial attraction is dopamine and norepinephrine. They're like cocaine highs, and they're biologically programmed to wear off somewhere between a year and a half and 2.5 years. So that first big I'm in love, can't wait to see you, it's about long enough for a woman to have a child millions of years ago, because we didn't live as long. Now, when that wears off, people think, oh, my God, I'm not in love anymore. That's not really the issue. We know that secure couples who have really made lasting a lifestyle for them, they have a transition point there where the brain literally transitions to more long-lasting, like oxytocin. And that means you feel really bonded, but the crisis is right there. You're starting to know each other, and it's a matter of trust. That's a predictable pattern. You have to test each other to know if you can truly trust each other. So what I tell couples is, congratulations, you've gotten to the point that you're on the door of lasting love, and the gateway is trust. And trust is simply, are you going to be there for me when I need you, and will you ever leverage your interest against mine? That's all the trust stage is about. Are you going to create a win-lose or a win-win with me? And are you going to walk through this door where we really negotiate who we are enduring vulnerabilities so that we can make this lasting? So it's predictable, and it's got some beautiful possibilities if we see it that way.
There you go, and I think that's really the key for a lot of people to understand. I remember I sort of had awakening back in the 1980s when Barbara DeAngelis was out there and she was presenting the program on making love work. And it was the first time I had heard somebody said, as we were just discussing, we love the way people make us feel about ourselves. But that's not sustainable, nor should it really be, demanded of people to do that. But you talk about, as we think about that, taking it to the next level, and you talk about what are known as 6 rights. Mm-hmm. What I would like you to go through, because I think this is really a cornerstone, if not the backbone of what you wrote here, and I think this is really unique because as people can come to just meditate on these and come to really know these, they will realize, wow, I never thought about love from this perspective before. So let's go ahead and go through each of these, kind of briefly what they are and how our listeners can kind of understand them at least a little bit.
Yeah, that's great, because the hallmark that's different from my book is most books on attachment give you a label, anxious, secure, avoidant. What does that tell you? That and $5 will get you something at Starbucks. It's about feelings. I wrote this about what it feels like to be in a relationship where you're loved. So let's go through that. And each of these rights gives you a feeling, and their brain uses that feeling as its GPS, as its little compass. The first right is called a right to exist. And it comes in when the little baby and you say, oh, there's little Daniel. Oh, so glad you're here. Or when you wake up in the morning and your wife says, good morning, handsome. That's welcome with joy. Or when you walk in the door, your wife walks in the door and honey, it looks like you had a bad day. Come over and get a hug. Now that gives you the feeling of welcome with joy. And if you haven't been given it early, say then you may have been given unwelcomed. And the funny thing is the brain will use either welcomed or unwelcomed as its navigation for love. The point is to have the secure feeling. So you have to have a right to exist. The second feeling is a right to reach out for your needs. That's the second right. It's okay. They're going to reach back, and you have a right to reach out and expect a congruent, attuned response where someone's noticing your needs, where someone understands your preferences and your patterns and your needs and how you think, your friends, what's going on in your life, your stresses. That gives you a feeling of worthy, deserving, and nourished. And that's another feeling that all people feel when they're loved, and you must give as a couple. So you have to give welcome to each other. You have to give worthy to each other. The third right that comes on is called a right to separate and belong. And separate belong is when the little toddler first finds out, wait a minute, that's mom over there and I'm over here. I'm a me. Oh my God, what's that mean? So when there is a me and a we, that's what it is. I get to separate, but I get to have someone who has my back. Not just a me, not just individuation, but a me and an empowering we, because the child knows I need supervision as well as separation. I need someone to have my back. And in couples, that comes in as the we. The we means that you know that someone is going to be the safety net under the higher wire act of your life, so you can pursue your dreams and know that someone's going to support them. Be there when you come home tonight and celebrate, or say, wow, tell me what happened today if I didn't. And there's a right to create your own experience, which means you get to be fully human. You get to be good and bad, weak and strong, kind and sometimes not kind. You get to have all that, and you get to create your experience on the basis of your standards, not somebody else's. And the next right is the right to assert, to have a voice, to be able to speak your truth, but also to have your wins in life so you can choose what you want. Those last two rights, the right to create your experience and the right to assert, give you a feeling of empowered with choice. And then the last right, if you get all four of those as a little one, You get welcomed and worthy and cherished and empowered, and you have those running in your brain as, yes, this is how it feels to be loved. Then you get a full right to love and be loved, and that's just what it sounds like. I get to love somebody else, and they get to love me back. It doesn't get split. It doesn't say I get to love someone else more. I get to be the loyal one while they don't. No, it means that I expect to love and I expect to be loved back. If you have those 4 feelings and those 6 rights, then you're in a pretty good relationship. The key is to give your brain back. So you don't take BS and you don't give BS. If you don't have those 4 feelings and those 6 rights, then some part, if you don't feel welcomed, you'll give unwelcomed. If you don't feel worthy, at some point in time, you will give unworthy. So that never works. So it really is training your brain to have these 6 rights. And if the listeners are out there listening, you think about it. What's going on in your relationship? If you are missing any of those 4 feelings, you're probably missing one of those rights, and that's probably what's bothering you in the relationship. That's the skinny.
Now, I'm looking at these, and I remember thinking about these as I was reading the book, and one of the big ones that I see when I hear couples, or at least individuals, talk about their relationships is the right to have your needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And what you typically hear is, they're just not meeting my needs. Now, let's go ahead and add some clarity, because I'm guessing in your experience you probably heard that a lot too.
Oh, yeah.
Now, because the other ones here, I think, for some people, like, for instance, they'll think, well, that kind of sounds new. Like, for instance, when you talk about the right to separate and belong, well, what does that mean? But I know that one there that we're talking about, the right to have your needs met, I think is a really big one that's pretty consistent when it comes to relationships just having a real hard time when it comes to sharing and being, sharing equally in love, so to speak.
Yes. And that comes up all the time. If there is one of those rights that comes up all the time in clients, it's that one almost all the time. Okay, because we have a society that doesn't really treat us as very worthy. A lot of things that go with it. But what that really means is it's okay to reach out. And the trick for couples is there's couples research by John Gottman who track couples, and what he found out is couples that are in the lasting category, he calls them the masters versus the disasters. The masters are good at what he calls love maps. That means they are good at tracking whether somebody likes a triple espresso macchiato at Starbucks. They know that they're a night person versus a morning person. They know their friends. Dessert, but you have to have a right to have that in a relationship. So between couples, it's really checking in. It's asking a lot of open-ended questions and noticing, gosh, this is what helps my beloved to feel really full and nourished. That's what it's. Sometimes, if someone didn't have a right to reach out, this is how it will play. They'll want to have their needs met, but they won't reach out fully. They will give the aura that, I don't have needs, or they just want to give, and they don't really express themselves sometimes, or they'll pull back. Or if they are given, they won't receive it because they don't have a right, and then they will be resentful. It's interesting the way it plays out. Sometimes a spouse is trying desperately to give, but somebody is complaining, I'm not getting my needs met because they didn't receive as a kid, and they still can't receive as an adult. It's like one couple that I was working with, they were both psychologists. He looked at me, he says, what do you do when you're with a wife and she thinks she has no needs? It can play out that way too.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of ways that one plays out. It's the right to ask and reach out, and you got to be able to receive. And most people miss that. Are you able to receive?
Now, it's what I liked also, you talked about something about rocking the boat in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it's kind of funny because a lot of times I think one challenge is a couple comes together and things are working well, but then all of a sudden, as what becomes inevitable is, people do just change. They change sometimes their values, they change the direction they're going in life, maybe their dreams are different, and all of a sudden the other person just has a rough time. And in fact, I remember someone I knew years ago. It was a year later. She had finally been divorced after being married for one whole year. And I asked her, and I knew this girl pretty well. And I said, so what happened there? Well, he just wasn't the same person I fell in love with. And I thought, I can see how things are going to go with you for the rest of your life if you don't kind of think about this a little bit. But you tend to hear that quite a bit.
Yes. There's two aspects of that. There's how much did she project her own thing, and did he change? Sometimes people will do a little bait and switch. It's when someone says that, if you're working with a couple, you have to kind of figure out which one it is. But we are always changing throughout life, and there's no such thing as a static marriage. I can still remember, this was early on in my career. I was undergraduate in my marriage and family degree, and a professor brought in 3 couples, so it would be experiential. A newlywed, at that time an older couple in their 40s, and then a couple that was 88 and 93 years old, and they'd been married 63 years. And one of the football players, who was a little disrespectful, looks at the 93-year-old man and says, "What's it like being married to the same woman for 63 years?" And I will never forget this man. He looked this guy straight in the eyes and says, "If you think you're married to the same woman your entire life, you're missing out on something." I've been married to 5 women, and each of them were different women, and they all had different needs, and I had to be a different husband to make the marriage work and so that she could feel loved. And he sat there and described the 5 women that were there every 10 to 12 years, and she was nodding in such approval. Let me know, there's no such thing as you marry one person. We are always adapting. This is why it's important to keep your love maps up, so that you can constantly upgrade and see, oh, this is where they're at, because nobody stays the same. So when people have that, there's a lot of things as to why she may have married this man. Did he do a bait and switch? Did she just project on him? We don't know. Somewhere in there is probably the truth. But the one thing we know for anybody that's out there listening is that the key is to attune to each other over the long haul, so you can make the micro adjustments, so you don't go off into the weeds of divorce or very dysfunctional relationships. When you're paying attention, when you're attuning, and that's the key thing. You understand what makes each other person felt. You understand how they feel inside, and this goes for both men and women, and what they need and how that's changing. Love can last. That's my answer to that.
And it's so true too, because again, people do change, and I think that's what's exciting. And I remember, for instance, when my wife and we've been together now going on 17 years now. Mm-hmm. On top of which, we also have become business partners. Now, there's a unique road for couples. A lot of times, couples are working outside the home, separate jobs, and in many cases, separate careers altogether. But I know I wanted somebody in my life, for instance, that seemed to share sort of the same direction that I kind of wanted to go at the same time. And I wasn't forcing it. I just figured I'll wait, and naturally it'll come together, and it actually did. Mm-hmm. However, what we both bring to the table are very uniquely different sets of skills where we complement each other as far as that goes. And so I've had people ask, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, one of the biggest things that I can see is put away the desire and the need to be right all the time. That's the big one. Being willing to adapt and really see that other side. You may even be right in a situation, but that doesn't mean you have to be. Does that make sense?
Yes. Oh, I've actually had one of the things I can often have to tell couples when they're You, and they get into their arguments, and both of them are hoping that I'm going to be the supreme arbiter of the universe and side with them. And there is no supreme arbiter. Both sides. And what I tell them is, you have a choice here. You can be right, or you can be in a relationship. And nobody's, there's no place where you can say, oh, your experience is wrong. So you're absolutely right. Now, one of the things I'm hearing, you mentioned earlier, there's this whole right to separate and belong. What does that mean? You just mentioned it because you're in a lasting relationship, and you are both differently skilled. You both have a right to be separate. You both have a right to be yourself. But notice how you've come together. I mean, I know your wife answered the phone and you're doing the interview. This is a we. You've created a dynamic teamwork where there's a we self. It's not just me versus you. It's you and me working on something together. Like the first move that I try to do when I'm working with a distressed couple is they are making each other the problem. You're the problem. You just change. This thing will get better. I know you can change, but I'm the right one. Now, if we can get them to get off the right thing and say, how can we work on this together, and to make the problem or the pattern the enemy, not the partner, now you've got a team looking at a third thing that needs to get changed. This is the birth of a we as I work with couples. So what I notice is that you've created a pretty good we, even though you're both separate. That's the right to belong and the right to separate. It creates a we. And yet you still have your individuality. This is the Goldilocks zone, where both people get to be a me, but not in a way that they lose themselves, but they also know that between them is this energetic third force called the we, that they both are highly invested in, and they invest their energies for the good, the higher good of the couple. And when you're looking at the couple, the higher good of the couple, most couples stop wanting to be right, and it's like, how can we make the relationship right? That's the key that makes last.
Absolutely agree with you. It doesn't have to take you a 60-year relationship to come to terms and understand what that actually means. So as you share your knowledge with people and your experience, what's some of your first approaches so people get a better idea of, how can I really look at this starting right now?
In what sense, Daniel? In what sense?
About getting started and seeing it in the way that we're describing it here.
Yeah. What I do is I think it's you have to. The big thing in this book is to realize that if you are tracking 4 core feelings, you're going to be understanding love a lot better. People go, I don't know why this relationship isn't working. Just track. Do you feel welcomed? Scale of 1 to 10. If you're out there and you're in a relationship, whether you're single or a couple, scale of 1 to 10. Do you feel welcomed with joy in this relationship? Scale of 1 to 10. Do you feel worthy and nourished? Do you feel like it's okay to have your needs met? And do you feel cherished and protected? And do you feel empowered with choice? 1 to 10. If we can just look at those, most couples will pick 1 or 2 of those that are missing. Well, the husband may say, I just don't feel very empowered. She goes, I don't feel very cherished or worthy. And so if we can track those, then you can tell whether you're in a good relationship. If you've got all 4 going, you're a pretty secure relationship. 3, if you've got 3 up and running above, at least I'd say an 8, then you're thinking, good relationship, a few things to work on, maybe we do a workshop. And if more than 2 are missing, you're in a toxic relationship. The thing is to track your feelings and not try to solve the problem right off. Mm-hmm. The feelings tell you what the real, deeper problem is.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big thing is track the feelings. And for men, that's especially important. We tend to want to fix a problem versus attend to the feelings of our beloved, and that never works for us.
It's such fascinating ways to look at love from this standpoint instead of the typical things that you tend to see out there. But when things sometimes don't work, and sometimes one side just decides, I just can't do this anymore, and then we may have a broken heart. Tell us what allows us to heal from a broken heart.
What allows us to heal from a broken heart? I think two things. What's underneath a broken heart is often I didn't feel worthy. And it really hits our feeling of worthy. We must really attend to that word. We are worthy. We are born worthy. Life teaches us to feel. The real key thing is to restore that feeling that biggest heartbreak that I see in couples or singles who've been through multiple breakups, needlessly, is they start feeling like, what am I, chopped liver? Am I just fatally flawed so I don't love? It's to realize that you are worthy of love, regardless. It's a birthright. The same way as your lungs don't ask, do I have a right to breathe? Because they know they're worthy at a very deep, what's called an organismic level. We all come. They know that our body knows it has a right for warmth and has a right to have its needs met. And we just have to really go back and allow ourselves to feel that initial sense of worthiness. And then hope. I think the other thing is hope. A lot of times when you've had your heart broken, it feels like because I'm unworthy, I'll never find love, or something is broken, and how did I pick the same type of person for the 10th or 12th time, or how many ever it is. And at that point, the brain does a little funny thing. It begins to say, I don't want to be hurt again. So anybody that might be an appropriate partner, it starts deleting. It's the same way we delete so many things in our life. If I told you were going to go out and buy a certain type of car, like a Volvo, suddenly you'd see them all over the place, but you hadn't noticed them before. So when the brain will delete the possibilities, and then we feel hopeless as a means of protecting us from getting in a relationship and getting hurt. That's when real heart sets in. So you have to deal with that sense of hopelessness that's there doing a funny little thing, trying to protect us from not feeling unworthy. If we can go back and restore hope and deserving and really rework through that wound, we can be healed. Change happens. There's a lot that goes into that, but that's the mini version of what heals us.
Wow, that's amazing stuff. This is pretty exciting when people come to explore this, and many questions when it comes down to, are we finding the right partner? But each and every one of these relationships that we have, should they not work out, actually teaches us a lot more about ourselves, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And that's part of the feedback loop. And I call that a right to create your own experience. If we don't have a right to look at all that we are, I haven't always showed up in a secure way. I talk about that in the book. I learned ways of, I was always afraid of being in that we, because if you're in what part of being in a we would be safe with a mentally ill mother? It was better to be separate. And that pattern of being separate did not do my first marriage any good. Didn't do my second marriage any good. So if we go and we can look at what our experience really is with understanding that, hey, nobody's wrong. Some part of me took the best deal available and I can upgrade it. Then we can make the changes. I call that a right to create your own experience. And it means we've all got good and bad. We've all got weak and strong. Nobody's perfect. A few years ago, I was in a relationship with and I was working on this workshop and I was working on it so hard that I was writing a manual for 150 pages in 1 week. And one day I was cranky, and she calls me. She goes, I'm really busy, honey. She calls me, and I said, I'm really busy, honey. She calls me again. I said, hon, I got to get through this. And then she goes, fine. And when I realized I was writing the part on responding to bids for attention, and I looked up to the universe and said, you have a funny sense of humor. And I called her And she looks at and she says, "I don't feel very welcomed with joy, Dr. Sally." And I had to say, hon, you're absolutely right. I did a lousy job today. I was so preoccupied on helping other couples, I forgot that we were a couple. And I'm sorry. And she let me have it for 10 minutes. And I said, "You're absolutely right. Tell me more about how you feel." She knows you feel. And I didn't try to fix it. And then after about 20 minutes, she goes back and finished the match. That's what happens and for all the men listening, if you had tried to fix it or stonewall or defensiveness, that's not going to work. But if you listen and own up to it and acknowledge your feelings, you're going to get that's what fixes the problem.
And the biggest thing, too, is the willingness on both sides to be willing to be adaptable. We're not talking about compromise. We're talking about the reality that you'll change. You certainly know your partner's going to change. Mm-hmm. That as you come to see, because I think two things really bring out true human nature, at least for us to discover ourselves, and that's money and relationships. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, your stuff can come out in this. And if you're willing to pay attention to that, we're not looking to strive toward perfection, but to perfectly understand ourselves and to perhaps come to a point that we're perfect for each other,
Yes.
And that takes work, but I'm of the feeling, that certainly through experience, that this is really work worth doing. And I say this is true because what really is amazing, I think, when people spend real time together, we're talking, it doesn't have to be decades of a relationship, but it could be a couple of years, it could be a year, it could even be 6 months, that you come to that point that, for instance, as we discussed earlier about the idea of the honeymoon in a relationship, when we're feeling jazzed about how good we feel because of how the other person makes us feel about the things we're doing for them, but we realize this isn't sustainable, and now pretty soon the real us emerges. Well, that's the real fun part right there, the quirkiness and the uniqueness of another person and how they are in circumstances. And certainly when you can, and we'll all experience these, certainly if we've been together long enough, those really rough times, and to realize, this person really has my back here, and I've got theirs. No matter what, we're going to figure out how to solve these problems rather than, as you were saying earlier, getting to that point, you're the problem. No, it's the problem that's the enemy, not you.
Exactly.
And what you're willing to do. And then when you get through that, you look back and go, wow, as a team, that was kind of a kick in the ass. Let's do that again. And you start looking forward to it. And that's the bad stuff.
Yes.
We're not even talking about the really cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you and your wife have been married for 17 years. That's you've got a secure love style there. Sometimes when those predictable problems and issues come up, if it's done, like for instance, a couple, like let me give an example of how it doesn't work out and why. This one couple showed up to me. She had been through 2 divorces, and she met this man who was just finishing up his divorce after 26 years, and they were high school sweethearts. They went to a high school reunion, right? They had never dated, but they knew each other in high school. And then they started dating. And her wound was she came from a family with an alcoholic father and mother. And so, she never had a right to belong. She was always wanting to belong. She was always having to be separate. And her worst fear was, I won't belong. Now, he was a man married 20. And his wound from childhood was, I don't have a right to create my experience to assert. Okay, so he always felt disempowered. She always felt I couldn't be cherished. Now, what does that mean? In 26 years, this man never initiated sex to his first wife. That's pretty disempowered. That's I can't create my experience. And the day came when they're engaged, when the ex-wife and kids said, we don't want a new woman in our lives, and we're going to do Christmas, and she's not going to be there. No right to assert. No right to create it. He says, tells her, have Christmas the next. What does this hit? Right to belong. And when she gets that old wound, she comes after him like guns blazing, and guess what he gets? His old feeling of disempowered. And now it's in a downward cycle, and they can't get out of it. He has no right to assert, so she goes, hey, buck up and tell her what to do. He has no right. It doesn't feel safe, because when he was a kid, if he had asserted, it would have been lights out. With that fear running, and she married somebody that would give her the same experience of not belonging, because that's all she had the rights for. Her brain found someone who gave her exactly what she'd been trained as a template to have as a kid. That's a bug in the system too. So the real work wasn't to say, let's give you some couple skills, let's give you some communication skills, some assertion skills. I had to go in and get him safe by rechanging that old feeling of disempowered for empowered from when he was a child. So then he could assert. And when he could assert to his ex-wife, then he could include her. When she could include her, she felt cherished, and then she began to empower him. What does that mean? He lost his job in an IT firm, and within a month she had him, because she was a very high-powered entrepreneur, another job. That's having your back. And then they spiraled up, and then they got married. But notice, it wasn't just skills. It was having a right to have an experience. Then you could give them the skills. That's the magic of working with these feelings. So long as she felt uncherishable, she was going to find a partner that would give her that feeling. And so long as he felt disempowered, he was going to find or create a way to have that same feeling, because that's what the brain has the rights for. Once you can go back and do some deep work, so your brain has a right to feel cherished and a right to feel empowered of these two, that was their dueling missing rights, then the marriage goes up. That is what people get into starting about 2 to 3 months in a relationship. Their missing rights start playing in it because they picked each other for that experience, because they didn't have a better experience, and then they complain about it. And what they don't understand is some part picked it, and it can be adjusted. Now, that's the other place where this shows up, and that's where a lot of couples lose it, because they haven't done the deep work to be able to change the way they fundamentally relate to each other. And they always pick each other for the very pain they're getting, and you have to say, thank you. There's some part was safe with this experience. How can we choose better? If a couple can make that, then the 2 and 3 months or the disappointment stage turns into lasting. If they can't do the inner work to make those changes, they fail, either short-term or long-term. That's the new thing my book points out, and for most couples, it's an eye-opener.
Well, that too, and for instance, the idea of separation or divorce, when you hear sort of a door open that says, well, maybe it just isn't meant to work out. Well, the whole idea, that may be true, and maybe you just decide, hey, enough is enough. But it's probably most likely, unless you really reflect back onto, okay, what didn't I contribute here, or did I contribute here that caused this to happen, you're going to find yourself in the same pattern with someone else. Just because it's a new territory doesn't mean that there's a new you. You want it to be new, but it's going to show up again, and that's where the deeper subconscious beliefs come into play.
Exactly. These rights are like templates, cookie cutters for experience, and people go, how do I keep having this Groundhog Day effect over and over? It's because the brain has a template for experience. How does that work? In my first marriage, in my childhood, it was way better to be separate, to be up in my bedroom, or to be gone, because if my mother saw you, you could get hit pretty bad. So being separate was the very best deal. You didn't want to belong. You didn't want closeness with her. Didn't realize that was how I was set. So a lot of me, in my first marriage, I created distance. Loving for her. doing my PhD, and I was always working but I was saying, well, I'm just being a good PhD student. But actually, some part of my brain was still trying to protect me from a borderline mother when I was 7, and it just hadn't been upgraded. And that failed. So I said, I did my therapy, and I said, I'm going to marry the exact opposite. And I did. I had learned my lessons about creating distance, but I married someone. I backdoored the distance.
Wow.
And I'm going, wait, the fundamental feeling of I can't be cherished, I have to be separate, my right to be separate but not to belong showed up in both marriages. And I thought I was choosing very different women, and if you met them at a party, you would say, yep, not the same woman, but at a fundamental level. My system found a way to get the same feeling of what I call not cherished. Yeah. But when we upgrade that, that's the key. And that's what you're talking about, is how these things keep repeating. And the brain is a tricky little thing. It's going to work real hard for survival. And once it says, I can survive separateness, that part of your brain that gets 2 million bits of information every second is working real hard. And the part that says, hi, I'm Daniel, or I'm Gary, or I'm whoever you are out there in Radio Land, whatever your name is, that part gets 138 bits of information a second. Who do you think is going to win?
Absolutely. And it's funny, too, Gary, because we really started doing a lot of interviews, I remember, back around 2009, right around 8 or 9, moving forward about neuroscience and how the brain works, that sort of a thing. And it was really amazing when I had that aha moment. Oh, this is why I am the way I am. And this goes for everybody. And it was a really unique interview, and it's fun because sometimes you'll get these little books, you don't think much about them, they haven't been heavily promoted, but it's like, there's where the real gold is. These are people like yourself who have a very direct, well-written message that really will sink into just about anybody at any level that they're at. And that's the key. What level are you at? And there was this psychologist I had on the air, and it was really unique what she shared in her book about how the brain works. And what I like about this, and I like sharing this especially in the context of what we're talking about, because you talk about love styles, and these are patterns that we have, that we've learned, and basically what happens is the brain recognizes and becomes comfortable, and will actually seek out that sort of experience because it's knowable and comfortable for us. So, in saying that, here's what she said in her book. She says, the brain burns a tremendous amount of energy, needs a lot of energy to do what the brain does. When you think of just the basic functionings of the automatic systems of the body alone, this is an engine that's going 24 hours a day. And so what it needs to do is to find the most efficient way possible to make this happen so it can reduce the amount of energy that it's using, as she says, so that it could come to possibly learn new things. Now, there was the key word, possibly, because the brain then, when it comes to engage in a new thing to learn, and this goes for everybody out there until they get this, and it doesn't take much for you to get this. The brain will actually, let's say you want to learn a new skill, you want to learn to cook, or maybe you want to learn how to build a website. This is out of anything you've done before because you're used to going to work and there's your pattern. You will find a point, and all of us do, that we come to this threshold that says, well, I'd love to build this website, but this just seems too complicated. Maybe I'll just pay somebody else to do it. And what that is the brain saying, look, you're about to stretch my capacity here. Why don't we go back to what we were doing before? I mean, it was easier, wasn't it? And there's that inner talk that we have there.
Yeah.
And when I came to read this, and it could have been anybody who had written that same thing, and it's probably out there, I realized, wait a minute. That is so true. How many of us have a New Year's resolution? whether it's losing weight or new career, whatever the case is, we want change, we desire change, but the reason many of us fail at change is because the brain is saying, look, I can give you the extra energy, but now I've got to adapt to a whole new way of becoming efficient with this whole new thing you're already adding to the already infinite list that I have. What do you say we just go back to the way things were? I mean, think about that. Your brain's really talking to you like that.
It does.
So go ahead and elaborate on that.
Okay. She's looking at it from the conservation of energy thing, and I think she's got right. I think she's right on that. The brain, all animals do. I mean, that's just the way it is. You've only got so much energy to expend. But I think there's something more basic. And it goes back. I didn't mention this in the book. There were chapters I took out.
So we get a hidden chapter or two, folks.
Yes, you're getting the preview for the second book will be Safe to Stay in Love. But, right now it's what's on Amazon is Safe to Love Again. But underneath, now you have a brain that evolved over millions of years. And the part of your brain that does survival is a reptile brain. Everybody's got it. And everybody has a reptile brain, and it's got the same DNA as your backyard lizard. So we know it's reptilian. This brain doesn't have feelings, so to speak, and all it is. It runs your body and your heart and your lungs and all that good stuff. What you're talking about, right? And it's an energy conservation machine. Now, this thing is looking for safety and survivability, and it's got one criteria. It's because it's not very sophisticated. It's I compare it to your guardian angel with an IQ of 10. It's not very smart. Now, this thing can only say survival equals breathing. Did I breathe through it? Oh, it must be good. That's survivable. This is why so many forms of yoga and meditation and other things emphasize breathing. They're really working with the reptile brain. Or if you really get upset and you see someone hyperventilating, you go, just breathe. Because if you can breathe through it, your brain, that part of your brain calms down. So that's really great. So if you breathe through welcomed and worthy and cherished and empowered and loved and protected. But what happens if you breathe through uncherished, unwelcomed, unworthy, or disempowered? That part says, well, we breathe through that. Now, it can only associate. It cannot do the concept of better. Happiness is above its pay grade. And so it says, how do I have that state again? That's what's going on. Right? So when we start saying, when some part of the brain says, I want to have it better, I want to have a different experience, that part of the brain says, wait a minute, did we breathe through better? Did we breathe through worthy? Did we breathe through this new thing? Wait a second, I think the neighbors are up to something. And then it will slowly start pulling us back. This is what's underneath the seminar effect, when people go and get this big hit of change and then 3 weeks later. It's what's underneath the New Year's resolution. And we don't need a resolution to be resolute so much as we need a resolution for the brain. This is why you have to go back. And part of the work is finding what flavor of safety that part of the brain was seeking. And if you have to get this, because if you get the exact flavor of safety that any dysfunctional pattern was seeking, the good thing it was trying to get, then you have to tie that to what the person wants. If you don't, this other part of you is going to fight you tooth and nail for the next breath. So the key thing is to say, this is why the book is called Safe to Love Again. For me, being distant wasn't me just being distant so my first wife would feel unloved. I wasn't trying to do that. Some part was trying to say, I don't want to get hit again. But it
right.
was and that's so subconscious. So then we have to allow belonging to be, yes, you're safe. If someone doesn't reach out for their needs, there's a reason, there's a good thing. Oh, I won't be rejected. Okay? There's always this feeling. And so what we have to do is upgrade safety in these feelings. that level of safety, pain will fight us to heal and safety. And the exact moment, the exact thing, if someone says, I don't want to be in a relationship, but their real fear is, I will lose myself, you've got to address that fear. That's the good thing is they're trying to preserve me versus an intrusive mother, say, or an intrusive father. So you have to work with these, what I call safety settings. There's always a 5-year-old doing this. So if we get too sophisticated, I believe in the power of the 5-year-old soundbite. Whatever makes sense to a 5-year-old is probably closer to the truth than any abstract thought.
Absolutely. And I think what people will find in your book, Safe to Love Again, is that you see that it really is simplicity. We didn't say simple, we just said simplicity.
Yes.
And if you notice, the Rubik's Cube was a pretty simple game or puzzle to play.
Yes.
But it wasn't simple.
Yeah. And when you're thinking about all these things, sometimes when we've done transformational work, we get really sophisticated. I had one couple that had done more change work and transformational work than you could shake a stick at. They had worked directly with Tony Robbins and Joe Dispenza and all the big names. And their thought was, we worked on ourselves thinking it would make a better marriage, and it did not. That's because if you work on yourself without a we, nothing's going to happen. But there was one session where she is looking at him and saying, there is there's a vibrational difference between you and me. And your vortex is kind of clashing with my vortex, and then it just feels like we are so vibrationally mismatched. And she goes on for like this for 5 minutes. I don't know what she's talking about. And he's got this confused look. And I simply said, could you say that the way a 5-year-old says that? She looks at him, gets tears in his eyes, and says, I just want a playmate. No. Now he understood what she needed. We tend to get all these abstractions, or we can do it if we're psychological aware. But the powerful thing is, how would the 5-year-old say it? I just feel lonely. I just want a playmate. I want to be able to know, it's okay to reach out. I just want to smile. That's welcome with joy. If we track it like a 5-year-old and get in touch with that part of us, we'll pretty much, and our partners, we're just really, the attachment brain is perpetually 5 years old. So to attune, we have to understand it the way we and the other person show up that way. And it doesn't mean we're childish. It just means that that's just the most powerful way of helping each other feel loved.
I'm reminded as you were describing that just now, years ago when I went through a heartbreak myself, and it was so true what you said that usually one of the first things we experience is the feeling of being unworthy. We're not good enough, especially if the other person leaves. And I remember I was at the gym, and I was sitting in a sauna quietly all by myself. And this was, for me, a fairly transformative experience. And it's amazing when you sit quietly and really, truly listen to your heart. Not your mind, because your mind will rationalize what you think you want. But this was sort of like my heart. It was almost really an inner voice. And I remember saying to myself, and it sounded just like what you were describing, that 5-year-old, I just want to be loved. And immediately a voice came in behind that and says, but you are loved. You have children. They love you. And that was empowering to realize, I'm loved by a lot more people than just this one person. Okay, so what do I need here? And that's what woke me up to realize, what do I need to work on from this experience that will help me not only move forward from the heartbreak, but move me into a direction to having the partner that I would really like to have in my life. And I think one of the funniest jokes that is out there at times, and I enjoy saying this at times because there's probably a lot of truth in it, from comedian Andrew Dice Clay, who simply says, some people play hard to get, I play hard to want. And isn't that true when you think about relationships in the if you want me as I am, all right then. Then maybe we've got something to build on.
Yeah,
So.
I play hard to want. Yeah, I wouldn't exactly. See, I can hear a few missing rights in there.
Yeah, yeah, I gotcha.
I talk about what we inevitably do is we create these identity castles.
Right.
Where we hide. It's meant to protect the little one, and most couple fights are two 5-year-olds running back to their favorite identity castle, how they protect themselves. And they're fighting desperately each other as 5-year-olds. That would be interesting to see how that would roll in a relationship. It's probably not real great.
Probably not, but it was funny anyway.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's
Because
really
I think we all recognize in that joke, he's kind of inherently right there.
Yeah. There's that part. I want to prove to me that you love me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program again. We've done a lot of shows when it comes to love, and it's refreshing when you see the kind of work that you have produced out there. And I do encourage people to get a copy of the book, or if nothing more, go to your website, which I'd like you to give for our listeners today.
Okay. Well, the book is called Safe to Love Again: How to Release the Relationships and Create the Love. You can also find it on my website, www.gary, G-A-R-Y, Salyer, and Salyer is S-A-L-Y-E-R, GarySalyer.com. You can see a place to order the book. You can sign up for some free, what I call love notes. I've got a video series there that if you sign up for, they're 2 to 4 minute little videos, a lot of which I summarize in the book. And there's some other people like John Gray and Ariel Ford in that little series. But, the big thing is to know that everybody deserves a love that lasts. And the book, Safe to Love Again, is my way of telling the world we can have a love that lasts, and we don't have 50-cent divorce rates or constant things. And you deserve it. You deserve to have that love. I
agree, because love is what brought us here in the first place. When you think about it, in creation. I'd like to end the program because I'm on your website now, giving our listeners some insight about the 3 truths that you live by. And I agree with all of this. The first one is there are no unresourceful people, only unresourceful states of being.
Yes.
The second one, it's all adaptable. Mm-hmm. Now, why don't you go ahead and give us the third one?
Which one did I put for the third one?
Oh, okay. Well, I figured maybe you kind of had this in tune, but I'll go ahead and read what you have here. It says, love is a simple experience that's won or lost in the small moments.
That one I think about. It's funny. I have a bunch of them I live by, and my website, my marketing person said, you can't have 10 of them. And I forgot which of the 10, but that's the one I gave to my son when he just got married.
Mm-hmm.
We think that there's these big things that like wedding anniversaries and, I'm going to celebrate the Valentine's Day with her. But it's in the little moments. Love is lost when somebody comes in the door and you're too busy on your cell phone. Love is lost when you give a harsh startup. Honey, I'm just really... Instead of saying, honey, can you just take out the trash? And it's in little moments, and these things add up. So I track little moments. The big moments are fine, anniversaries, weddings, and all those things. But it is in the very small moments of when you first wake up, when you walk through the door, when someone calls you or texts you for bids, what are called bids for support and attention. Those matter. They're when successful couples turn toward each other to meet each other's needs 86% of the time, and the disasters only 33%. So stop looking at the big picture and look at the little moments. How can I meet that bid for attention? That's what that means. And it's a game changer. It's a game changer.
And quickly to add to that too, Gary, before we finish off the program here, is something that you said in your book, and I'm reminded of the movie Don Juan, which starred Marlon Brando and Johnny Depp. Mm-hmm. And it's a wonderful movie about, as Marlon Brando, he was a psychiatrist who was interviewing, or basically seeing Johnny Depp's character. He believed he was Don Juan. and came to the point that Don Juan had this particular affliction that basically means that he's helplessly, hopelessly in love with the woman that he's in love with. But it was through this process of coming to know Don Juan that he came to realize, as he sits with his wife, Faye Dunaway, in the garden toward the end of the movie, he simply smiles and he says to her, "What are your dreams?" And I think a lot of us, if we could just clue in, what is our partner's dreams? How can we help them achieve that? And they do the same for us, life will simply become astounding.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Making dreams come true is part of what I call empowered by choice. I discuss that in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is about that is when people don't tune in and they ask and get curious and help support each other's dreams, it comes out as gridlock. There's a conversation you keep having. You go, why are we having this negative conversation? Why is it always this? Because when you don't have your dreams met, it comes out as sideways, as a perpetual criticism or petty argument. And because you don't have a right to assert and say, hey, for many women, it's like life-changing. Like one client, when after 20 years, he took my advice and said, honey, do you have any big dreams? And she says, I thought you'd never ask.
Which is exactly what Faye Dunaway says in the movie.
Exactly. This is huge because we all have dreams, and that's part of Love Maps. Mm-hmm. It's part of feeling worthy, but it's where we're empowering them with choice and purpose. That's huge. Human beings, we are a purpose-driven group, and we want something bigger. Whether that's our children or sometimes it's getting a degree or building, but we need more than just existence, and that's important to who we are as a species. If we don't get that about our partner, I mean, in a world of 7.5 billion people, which one of us matters that much? But like the scene in the movie Shall We Dance, where she looks at this private detective and says, but in a marriage, you're a witness for each other, and you support each other's dreams. You matter. When you pick up on each other's dreams and support them, it's the ultimate form of saying, you matter. I'm going to help you create a legacy that you want.
Gary, very well said. And again, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program. And one more time for our listeners, why don't you go ahead and give out that website?
The website is www.GarySalyer.com. And there you can find all sorts of goodies and the link to buy the book, Safe to Live Again.
Sounds good. Gary, thank you again for being on the program today.
And thank you, Daniel. It's been a wonderful.
You bet. I want to thank all you loving listeners out there for tuning in. You can also discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.